together fight the foe. Scoring touchdowns for the blue on blue. The Argos will win for you. Full of fight and courage, you can't stop. They pile up the points until they reach the top. Pull together till the Grey Cups won. Go Argos, go, go, go! Go Toronto Argos, go, go, go! Pull together, fight the foe. Scoring touchdowns for the blue on blue. The Argos will win for you. Full of fight and courage, you can't stop. They pile up the points until they reach the top. Pull together till the Grey Cups won. Go Argos, go Toronto, go! Go Argos, go, go, go!
Good evening, everybody. Welcome to Season 3, Episode 5 of the Argo Bounce Live audio show, a weekly talk show devoted to the Canadian Football League's 18-time Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts with co-host Nick Small and yours truly, Chris Pomay. I hope everyone's doing well on this rainy Wednesday, July 10th, 2024 here in Southern Ontario. And I'm excited to do another show with Nick tonight about the Toronto Argonauts. And we're going to break down their game against the Saskatchewan Roughriders and preview their upcoming Thursday night 7:30 matchup with the Montreal Alouettes, the Grey Cup champions, tomorrow night, and I'm looking forward to it as well. As always, the Argo Bounce Live audio show is live streamed on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, X, and on Instagram and on all major platforms. And the Argo Bounce Live audio show is on once a week on radio station WQEE 99.1 FM in Noonan, Georgia, the home of Southern Talk and Sports. I'm going to bring on our co-host, Nick Small. We're going to talk a little bit about the Toronto Argonauts. Good evening, Nick, on this rainy Wednesday, July 10th, 2024.
Hey, Chris. Yeah, maybe a little bit of rain on our parade as we've lost our second straight game, but it's nothing compared to the downpour in Hamilton right now. It could be a lot worse if you're giving up 14 points after 3 minutes of play and being given up over 300 yards passing just at halftime. So, yeah, not a great performance for the Argonauts last week with 5 given up turnovers, but it could always be worse, right?
Well, like I said, the last 2 games, let's give them credit. They lost to Montreal, arguably the best team in the Canadian Football League, and then they lost to Saskatchewan, who are now 4-0 and probably the most improved team in the CFL as of this point with Corey Mace. So we're all fans of the team, but sometimes you got to give the other team credit, and Saskatchewan made more plays. And the last 2 games for the Argos and their losses, this is what's concerning. Losses do happen, Nick. 11 penalty, like in the last 2 games, they've had 18 penalties for 190 yards, which is not acceptable. And the last 2 games, they've had 7 turnovers, 5 interceptions, 2 fumbles. Obviously, some of the interceptions were tips and deflections, but when you turn the ball over that much with those many penalties, you're generally not going to win football games. So the Argonauts have lost to some very good football clubs, but in order to beat very good football teams, you can't turn the ball over and have that many penalties. So that's something they're going to have to work on starting tomorrow night and going forward to the season, in my opinion.
Yeah, the other concerning aspect is their lack of offensive production. The 5 turnovers aside, the other big issue is that over the last 2 games, Cameron Dukes has not completed 100 yards passing to any one of his wide receivers. If the CFL statistics are correct from this last game, which, again, I hate bringing it up, but I wish Genius Sports and the CFL could get their act together to make sure everything's better polished. DeMonte Coxey had 5 receptions of 11 targets for 76 yards, and that was your best wide receiver yardage and receptions. So, and yes, like you said, giving up 5 turnovers, you don't expect to win football games like that. But on the flip side, Saskatchewan really should have won that game by more when you've given up 5 turnovers. The fact that they only lost by a touchdown is pretty miraculous. And I think there's a lot of comparisons to be made to that East final last year against Montreal, where nobody remembers that the defense stood on their heads. And given how short a field Toronto had all night yesterday defensively, the fact that they held Saskatchewan to field goals for all but one main possession is pretty spectacular in itself. So it's another one of these situations where unfortunately the defensive play is going to get overshadowed by their lack of offensive production on the field.
Well, and at the end of the game, they had a chance to get the ball back down by 7, and credit to Saskatchewan and Shea Patterson. They put him in a situation to win the game. He only threw one touchdown pass, rushed for a touchdown, but Patterson didn't do anything to hurt the team. And at the end of the game, he made some good throws to get first down. So credit to Corey Mason, AJ Ouellette, and the Saskatchewan Roughriders. The Argonauts, even though they only lost by 7 points, too many mistakes. Go ahead, Nick.
Give some credit to Mark Mueller, who had the guts to make those passing play calls. It would be so easy to just run it with AJ Ouellette, take your 2 short runs, punt the ball, and give Nick Arbuckle at that point an opportunity to potentially tie, if not win the game, by choosing not to do that. Another thing that I think is really interesting over these last couple games, not just that Toronto's played, but there's been a couple now where a missed extra point or a decision to go for 2 that in this case unfortunately failed early game because of a holding penalty.
Why? I want to ask you. I didn't mean to cut you off, Nick. When the Argos scored a touchdown, they went up 6-0. It was only the first quarter. I think there was like 12 minutes left. I would love to ask Ryan Dimwitty why they wanted to go for 2 points there, unless their field goal kicker was hurt or not 100%. I just don't understand the reasoning behind that 2-point conversion.
I actually completely understand it. You were struggling to get momentum in that first possession. You just get a punt return touchdown. You're putting your offense out quickly against a cold defense that hasn't had time to really react to it. You're running probably, as we saw, a pretty well practiced play, and that if you're expecting it to be a low scoring game, because as we saw with Trey Patterson throughout the game, and especially in that first half, they weren't doing any better in terms of offensive production. I think they had 3 or 4 3-and-outs or just really short drives that didn't really result in much in that first quarter. You're trying to set Saskatchewan behind the 8 ball early, and that was part of the Argonauts' game plan going into that game. If they could get up early, you're putting a ton of pressure on a young quarterback in Patterson to try to overcome a major deficit really early in the game. And again, look at the game down the road with Hamilton and BC. Hamilton was down 14-0 5 minutes into the game, and they were playing behind the 8 ball from the get-go, and that's, I think, exactly what was the game plan. And again, if it wasn't for the Awashe's holding call, which I don't even think he even needed to make, but unfortunately you can't do it regardless of where you are on the field, in proportion to the running back, it leads to the play being called back, take the penalty. You can't switch after a penalty. You have to, if you went for 2, you have to keep going for 2. And unfortunately, it just wasn't a very good read. And it almost got tipped for Daniels to receive, but wasn't able to make it the case. So then that kind of goes for opportunity.
I see your point, Nick, but I think we're going to disagree on here. I'm old school. What's the difference between 7-0 and 8-0? 1 point. And the thing is, to me, it's only the first quarter. I just don't like seeing teams go for 2-point conversions until it's like the second half of a game, or it's where you absolutely need it. But you know what? The penalty call, you know what? They might have got that extra point if they didn't have the penalty call, and that hurt them too. And that's different between the CFL and the NFL. The NFL team could just say, okay, bring on the place kicker and we'll kick the extra point. In the CFL, obviously with the rules, if you get a penalty when you go for 2, you got to go for it. So I don't agree with the call, but it's not like they lost by 1 point. If they lost this game by 1 point, then you could say, hey, that was not a bad call. So, but to me, too many penalties, too many miscues. And one thing I'm concerned about too is Kadeem Carey, he only got the ball 11 times for 39 yards. He had a nice touchdown, but they got to try to get him the ball more than 11 times. And you got to credit Saskatchewan, too. They did a nice job on Kadeem Carey. Dukes did have some nice scrambles. I think Dukes had, 6 carries for 47 yards.
Yeah, it was the run blitzing that Saskatchewan had on first down. That was really impressive in my opinion. You compare it to how Montreal typically saved their blitzes for second down. Saskatchewan was reading run really early. And even on some of the screenplays too. Part of me kind of worries that there might have been a bit of a tell that that maybe on some of the screen passes there was something that kind of gave away what it was, because Saskatchewan was really keen on picking those up. But I think part of why they switched to such a pass heavy game, especially in the second half, was that they weren't able to establish Kadeem Carey quite as much as they did at the beginning.
We have Robbie Schneider from the 716 Sports Blizzard podcast on our show. He says, "Hey guys, fun time last week. Go Argos." And he wants to ask a question, Nick, and I'm going to let you answer it. Robbie wants to know, how many points is the extra point? 1, and the field goals count as 3. Nick, you want to answer it for Robbie?
Yeah, so in case you missed what we were talking about earlier, Robbie, at the beginning of the game when the Argos scored their first touchdown, just like the NFL, you have the option to kick the extra point or go for 2 from I think it's the 3-yard line where it snapped from. The Argos chose to go for 2 points. And just like in the NFL, you have to basically score another touchdown by pass or run to get the 2 points. And then, yes, the field goal still count as 3 if it's third down and 10 and you're at the 40-yard line, you can kick a 47-yard field goal. The difference in the CFL is that there is the rouge element. So if a field goal is missed wide and the ball is not brought out of the end zone, it counts as a point. If it's a touchback, it counts as a point towards the kicking team. And same with a punt as well. If the punt, you're trying to aim for that coffin corner that you hear in the NFL. If you kick it through the end zone, it's a touchback. Normally, it's just a touchback in the NFL. In the CFL, it awards 1 point as well, the rouge point.
But if the ball hits the goalpost or the crossbar at all, it's a dead ball, and it means no points at all.
Yeah.
Okay. Before we get to some more questions, Nick, just some quick thoughts on the state of the Hamilton Tiger Cats. And we knew Winnipeg was going to get a win. Now it's a matter of who's going to be the next winless team to win, Edmonton or Hamilton. And I'm right now going to go with Edmonton. I really think Edmonton this week's going to win. But the Hamilton Tiger Cats, and I've already heard talk about Scott Milojevic. It's like you just brought him in. You can't let him go after 5 games. Have they made any more coaching changes other than their special teams coach right now? Do you know?
They haven't fired their defensive coordinator yet, but I know that half of Tiger Town has their resumes lined up to take his job the way things are going. But I'm glad you brought up the Edmonton Ottawa game. We're jumping a little bit into this week's games and sort of doing the picks. If Edmonton does not beat an Ottawa Red Blacks team missing Drew Brown because of his concussion issues in the Winnipeg game there last week, if Edmonton does not win that game, close or otherwise, Chris Jones is out of a job. I cannot. They've had almost 12, I think it's 12 days of rest now, if not more.
Yeah.
Might even be 16. I can't remember what I heard from, but they've had more than 2 weeks of preparation. If they cannot win this game at home with everything in momentum on their side to be able to win this game, then I don't know how you justify him keeping his job. So there is a ton of pressure in Edmonton right now that they absolutely need to get out of the basement.
2 guys on the. I agree with you, Nick. Chris Jones and Washington and Hamilton. I think he's got to be feeling the pressure too at some point.
Yeah, and then when we go in towards Hamilton, well, I mean, I remember when we had Bart Andrus, Count Chocula here in Toronto, and I know things didn't go well there either here, and I think he got to 8 or 9 games 0-8 before they let him go. So I think there's still a little bit of time for Scott Milanovic, but Yeah, the big concerns with Hamilton for me are the secondary. Like the passing game has actually looked quite decent from Hamilton, except for maybe early on in that game where they were behind the 8 ball early and had to play catch up. But the secondary is just non-existent in Hamilton right now, and that's what's leaving the big concerns right now, especially with some of the additions like Jamal Peters that they added. You almost wonder if Simone Lawrence is just going to step in and start coaching the D at some point, because there's just something in that secondary where they're either not making the right reads or they're just not communicating, or something is completely wrong out there, because they're leaving guys deep wide open when they're playing cover twos and cover threes. It's just they're just completely twisted around, and I don't know if they just weren't expecting that kind of speed from BC out of the gate, or if some of the crossovers threw them off. But yeah, it's just, especially at home, it's just such a disappointing loss. And what kind of worries me too is that they now have a bye week playing Toronto at home, and Hamilton is going to really want to bring its A game against their arch rivals. And it's the way I always want to see it as a fan. Like, as fun as it is with when the other team, our arch rivals in Hamilton, aren't doing very well and you want to beat down on them, I actually prefer it when both teams are really strong, because you want to see both teams at their absolute best. And I'm not sure we've seen Hamilton at their best quite yet.
Simone Lawrence would be intriguing, but he is sort of like the pinball Clements of Hamilton. And I don't know if he wants to step in that coaching role, because if he steps in that coaching role and the defense still struggles, he might start hearing some boos and stuff too. I don't know. That's a good question. I would love to ask him if he'd want to get into coaching. Obviously, we'll see what happens there, but the fans in Hamilton are not very happy right now. I was listening to their fifth quarter with Rick Zamperin, and they're really not too happy. But you know what? This is a CFL. It's only 5 games. They still got 13 games to go, and anything can happen in the CFL. All you have
Yeah,
to do is make the playoffs.
the saying, the CFL season doesn't truly begin until Labor Day. So, yeah, but there definitely something needs to be done there to right that ship around. And I mean, it's coming against our ship, so we'll see what happens. What would really help, going back to Toronto, what would really help is if we were able to win this game coming up this week against Montreal. Maybe we can talk a little bit about that and examine what's to come, because fortunately, with airing these games on Wednesdays now, we have a chance to see the depth chart ahead of time, given that the last 2 weeks the Argos have played on Thursday night. The depth chart's out a day ahead.
Absolutely. Robbie's got another question for us. Why does the CFL only have 3 downs instead of 4 like the NFL? Well, Robbie, football over here has always been 3 downs. Canadian University football, CFL is always 3 downs. And to be honest, I like the 4 downs, but I like the 3 downs. And that's the way the CFL game has always been. So
Traditionally, when the current version of football as we see it now, transcended from being kind of a mix of international rugby football union rules and association soccer rules, once it kind of merged into what it is now, and you had the ending of the scrum with the down plays and all that, they instituted the yardage for first downs to limit the amount of offensive possessions the team had. Originally, it was 3 downs for 5 yards, and it quickly became, after a few years of trying that out, it quickly became noticed among teams that played that 5 yards was too short a distance, so they extended it to 10. And in the United States, they decided, well, to compensate for it, we'll give you the extra down. So now you have 4. Canada said, well, no, you're sticking with 3. And it happened to stick that we continue to just play with 3 downs right up to present day. So that's kind of the short historical version of why we only have 3 downs compared to the NFL. It really stems to the early days of football, where Canada has always kept 3 downs for 10 yards in their regulations, whereas the US were actually the ones that changed it to 4.
thanks, Robbie, for the question. And Nick, we'll get onto this one. What did you like from the Argos in this game, and what concerns do you have after the second straight loss to Saskatchewan?
Well, I definitely like the special teams play. I mean, you got to give a huge amount of credit to Janarian Grant.
I
The
called him
way,
as I did call him as the X factor. I said
yeah,
he's going to have a big game, and he was terrific. Three kickoff returns for 92 yards and 6 punt returns for 132. One touchdown was 84 yards.
yeah, he's had a couple good runs too. He works really well with the kind of end around sweep plays that we sometimes see the Argonauts run. That they used to run the pass with Curly Gittens. Janarian Grant works really well for that. I keep mixing them up because their names are right beside each other on the depth chart. But yeah, the way he's been running on the returns as well, it just got you the impression that he was able to use his lateral quickness to find a hole, and finally he did, which was amazing to see, especially early in the game. It fed into that game plan of forcing Saskatchewan to play catch up early. Then I think it becomes a little bit trickier because a lot of things didn't go right after that. I thought the defense actually played quite well with the short field. I thought the secondary, you take away the one play that was there where um, Jake Seresno already out, and then I think the play before you had Derek Parrish and Jordan Williams collide. So then they were out. They lined up three defensive linemen, which you don't usually see on a 1st and 10. You usually see that in kind of a prevent defense if it's 2nd and 20 and you don't think you're facing the Alouettes who are going to punt the ball at their own line of scrimmage. Saskatchewan didn't do that, but I think what was the mistake in that play in particular was that they sent the house. And I know I said you wanted to put pressure on Patterson early and often in the game, which they did. I think that was one particular moment where they probably had to hold back on and keep at home just for those couple plays when you could get Parrish and Williams back in. I think that's what really hurt them. And the missed tackles aside, they're also not great. But other than that, I thought the secondary and the linebacking core actually played quite well. Um, so that was another positive thing from them. And then yeah, then I think it becomes a little bit tougher to really evaluate because I think a lot of the mistakes offensively kind of rear their ugly heads. The turnovers obviously being the number one significant thing. If you're letting Saskatchewan start from midfield and in your territory 5 times, it's amazing that they only gave up 30 points and they didn't give up 50 because usually teams just completely capitalize and eat up on it. So that's why I give a lot of credit to the defense to be able to really put Saskatchewan to a halt.
My grades for this game is the offense gets a D, the defense gets a C minus, and the special teams, I'm going to give them an A because Liam was solid again. It's 3 for 4, including a 48.
Harlau.
Yes, I got to learn how to pronounce his last name. 3 for 4, including a 48-yard kick. He's been very good this year. And Javarian Grant, he was outstanding. 92 yards kickoffs, 132 yards on punt returns, and the 84-yard touchdown as well. And I really thought that was a good start to the game for the Argos, but unfortunately, that 2-point try kind of was snuffed out with that 15-yard penalty, and they just didn't have it the rest of the night. But I really think the special teams were the best part of the Argonauts on last
Yeah.
Thursday against
Yeah,
Saskatchewan, in my
give a
opinion.
lot of credit to Mickey Donovan ever since he's came in for the special teams. I think 3 years, if not 4. He's been absolutely exceptional, and he's been one of the few coaches who've been nice enough to come up and say hello there when we were at the Double Blue game, my father and I. So really nice guy and exceptional job out there coaching the special teams unit. They've been phenomenal ever since he's came in, and yeah, really give credit to those guys for what they're doing on special teams.
And if they have any chance of upsetting the Alouettes Thursday night, they're going to need the special teams to play at their best again. And that
Yep.
leads to my next question, Nick. Thoughts on head coach Ryan Dinwiddie's decision to pull quarterback Cameron Dukes and replacing him with Nick Arbuckle with 2.5 minutes left in this game, down by 7 points. And Arbuckle came in and was effective, 4 for 6 for 35 yards and got the team 3 points and to cut it to a 7-point game at the end.
Do you think it should have been early? They should have replaced him earlier, or was it too late?
I think it might have been a little bit too late. If they had like maybe 5 or 6 minutes left, to me, in my opinion, I thought it was a little bit too late. But that's why I'm here. I'm not behind the bench.
Yeah, I know a lot of us fans were surprised by that it was Nick Arbuckle coming in and not Brian Scott, given that he made that beautiful 40-yard pass to Mackay Polk down at the end of the BC game. I think part of the difference is circumstances, or sorry, the Montreal game, not the BC game. I think part of the circumstances were that the Montreal game was already kind of out of hand and it was garbage time compared to this game where there was a legitimate shot. And yeah, I give credit to Nick Arbuckle. He played well, and unfortunately, yeah, just I don't think there was enough time really left. And again, give credit to Saskatchewan's offense, Mark Mueller, to have the guts to make those play calls that allowed Saskatchewan to kill the rest of the clock. But I think it was something that was needed to pull Dukes and to just cool him down and send him aside. It's been established that he will start this week, tomorrow, in Montreal against the Alouettes. So we can set all the speculation on should it be him, should it be Arbuckle, should it be Scott, or a combination. I think what you will see, just kind of jump ahead to your question that you've got there. Yeah, I think if it starts to look kind of like this last game, if he gives up 2 turnovers, let's say before halftime, I definitely see me on a bit of a shorter leash. I think what they need to really do with this game against Montreal is capitalize on some of the run pass options to be able to really take advantage of that mobility that I think he at times in this game he was trying too hard to force things in, whereas I think sometimes he's got to still kind of, as we've looked back before, throw it out of bounds if you're feeling a ton of pressure, because a punt to pin them deep. You've got one of the best punters in the league with John Haggerty. Punt it deep, pin them in their own 20-yard line, and make them run the length of the field. I think you've got to do that this week against Fajardo, because if you're coughing the ball up 4 times to Montreal and Fajardo starting at year 40, you're going to be down 40 points at halftime. So you don't want to be in that situation.
And with a young quarterback, you want to build him up and stuff like that. But yeah, I would say if they have 2 or 3 turnovers in the first half, and then another reason they didn't go to Scott in the game against Saskatchewan is because they wanted Nick Arbuckle's experience in there. And Brian Scott, as good as he played against Montreal, doesn't have that much pro football experience in the CFL compared to Nick Arbuckle. So I think that's why they brought him in as well. Hopefully they can play a clean game, and that's going to be one of my keys for them to have a chance to upset the Alouettes. Special teams, the defense has to tighten up, and they can't turn the ball over. They have to play a clean game to give themselves a chance, and that's how I see it.
Yeah, so just looking at the depth charts for this week, defensively is going to be really interesting because, of course, Jake Serezna is on the 1-game injured list, so he'll be missing this week's game. Defensively on the secondary, they also made a couple of changes. Leonard Johnson is back in at boundary side corner. Benji Franklin moved back to the field side. And then making his first start, I believe, for the Argos, Amani Dennis is going to be playing halfback on the boundary side. And it's going to be Mason Pierce, who's demoted to the practice squad for at least this game. And then offensively, the Tommy Niels got added to the 6-game injured list. Tavares Daniels is moving over to the right side. And Mackay Polk, who sat out this last game against Saskatchewan, he's coming back in. He was the guy, I believe, that caught the pass from Cam Dukes, if I recall correctly. So a couple moves around there. Other than that, it's pretty much the same units that they had last week. Fraser Sopik starting again at boundary side linebacker ahead of Jonathan Jones. And I find that really interesting. That's one other guy I should have mentioned who had a really good game. I thought Fraser Sopik was all over the field and made a couple of big plays.
Nick, one thing I wanted to say too is the Argos defense has given up 123 points in 4 games for an average of 30 points a game this season. And in the last 3 games, they've given up 30 plus points in 3 straight games. Do you feel the defense can tighten up this week against the Montreal Alouettes? And what changes do you think you'll see from the Argos defense from their first meeting at BMO Field a couple weeks ago in Toronto?
Well, the core thing is their secondary has to do better. I think that is number one. And it's not going to be easy in Montreal as opposed to being at home in Toronto. I think looking at how it went last time these two teams faced off, there was a good amount of pressure that they generated on Fajardo, but Fajardo was able to find guys open he was under immense pressure. Got some help, of course, from a couple of roughing the passer penalties, high tackles, a clip on the leg. So I think the line needs to have a little bit more discipline on their play, and then the secondary just needs to do a better job if they want to clean up, because what we saw was, in my opinion, was just a really stellar performance by an elite level quarterback in Cody Fajardo. He was able, under the pressure that was provided, to still find open guys. So I think that it's going to come down to how the secondary tightens it up against wide receivers, particularly on the middle and deep passes. I think they've got to force Montreal to make shorter plays down the field, because in a lot of these situations, it was 2nd and 10 or 2nd and 7, and Montreal was able to find guys 10, 15 yards down the field wide open. So I would play a lot more towards the middle and deep pass protection, leave some of those swings and screen passes open early game, make Montreal just do little short chip plays, and then you can adjust for that at halftime, as opposed to kind of the other way around, where you play against the run, you play against the short pass, and then you're leaving guys wide open for 30, 40-yard bombs.
Montreal won that game 32-26, but Calgary for the first 3 quarters had a very good chance of winning that game. And that's the difference between championship teams and teams that don't know how to win, is that the teams that have the championship experience know how to make the plays at the end of the game. And Montreal outscored them, I think, 15-0 in the fourth quarter. But Montreal was beatable for 3 quarters of that game. And when you have a lead on the Montreal Alouettes, or teams that are elite, you can't let your foot off the gas pedal. So if the Argos are able to get any kind of lead against the Alouettes, or even go up by double digits, you can't take your foot off the pedal with the Montreal Alouettes. They're too good of a team, and they're too well coached by Jason Moss to just say, yep, this is over with. And I forgot to mention the AC, Anthony Cavillo, who's their offensive coordinator.
Jake Mayer particularly didn't play very well in that second half, which was a little disappointing.
Absolutely. And that leads to my next question, Nick. What are some of your keys to an Argos upset win over Montreal on Thursday night at 7:30 kickoff on TSN? And TSN 1050 was Mike Hogan, and I'm assuming Ben Grant will be with him on the road for that game.
Well, don't turn the ball over 5 times. That's a pretty solid start. I think after the way they've played their last 2 games, so they've given up, was it 7 turnovers in the last 2 games?
And and 18 penalties the last 2 games for 190 yards.
Yeah, clean up the penalties and the fumbles or the interceptions. The defensive line's the one that's really got to clean up their act, because they had lots of opportunities to put pressure on Montreal's quarterbacks in Toronto, and those penalties are what really allowed Montreal to keep their drives going and sustain and extend that lead against Toronto. So I think those 2 in particular. And then I guess what's also an important thing is, because of what we've seen with the crowd in Montreal, they've been one of the more energetic crowds this last couple of weeks to begin the year, in part because of the championship, in part because of the way the stadium's configured. They need to silence that crowd early. So I think if you do get in a situation like last week, where you get a touchdown early, especially on special teams or something, I'm all for going for 2 again to try to really put a grip down on Montreal. I think if you make them play from behind early, it's a good situation to be in. So those are kind of my things I'm open to see. But yeah, the number one thing is the discipline between ball security and penalties. That's the thing that's really cost them these 2 games.
By the way, Robbie is still watching. Thanks, Robbie. What time is the game this week? It's tomorrow night, Robbie. Thursday, July 11th, 7:30 kickoff. It's on TSN and TSN 1050 on radio. And in the States, I'm not sure if it's available in the States, but I think CFL Plus, you can watch it on live stream.
Yes, I believe it's going to be on CFL Plus.
Absolutely. And by the way, Nick, for your stats, I would check out CFL Connect. Check out
CFL
Connect. Yeah, I'll send you the link to it. They're very, very good with statistics.
Yeah, while we're talking about the statistics, I'd be a little remiss not to acknowledge the death of Cap Friendly, the great NHL salary cap tracking site that unfortunately is officially sayonara today. So I'll leave a word in for that.
By the way, the Alouettes have since last year have won 12 straight games from the regular season in the playoffs, and this year their last loss in the regular season was week 15 last year at home to the very same Toronto Argonauts, 23-20.
Yeah. If we're flipping it on the other side of the ball, I do want to mention too, looking at some keys. One of the benefits that I've listened to others talk about this week is that the Toronto Argonauts have had extra rest, 2 extra days of rest compared to Montreal. Montreal is quite beat up, in almost the same situation as Toronto is. They've got 7. No, I'm miscounting. 12, I think, on their injured list. Yeah, 12 on their 6-game injured list. So kind of similar to Toronto. Not quite as many start players, but a couple. Richie Stubblefield is one. David Cote, their kicker, is one.
Yes.
So they have a backup kicker. So there's one key. And Marc-Antoine Dequoy on their depth chart is listed as a game time decision. And if he's out, they don't have another DB listed in their secondary right now, which is really interesting. So that could be a potential key to their game, especially if Dequoy is out. What I think offensively they really need to do, other than not turn the ball over, the wide receivers really need to get going. Whether it's Tavares Daniels, DeMonte Coxie,
Rasheed Bailey.
Rasheed Bailey, whoever, they've got to find someone who can get sustained yak yardage, because the fact that over the last 2 games, not one receiver has gotten over 100 yards receiving, that I think is the biggest red flag that's going on with the Argos offense right now. Even if it's rushing yards with carry, I'm okay with it at this point. But I think teams have now, after a couple of weeks, have started to see the Argonauts running schemes, which is why it hasn't been quite as dominant as it was the first couple of games this season. And yeah, they just need to find a way to connect with these wide receivers. And unfortunately, there were a lot of times in the Saskatchewan game where you watched on the replays where guys were wide open. I looked specifically on Dukes' last interception, and Kadeem Carey swung to the right, and there was nobody within 15 yards of him.
Tunnel vision. See, I was going to say a term that young quarterbacks have to go through is tunnel vision when you're a young quarterback. And that's something Cameron Dukes and most young quarterbacks have to work through, is to make sure they see the whole field and not just focus on one. Hey, one of my keys for this game, I've already mentioned about the playing a clean game, disciplined game. The defense has got to tighten up. But there's 2 guys on the Alouettes that they really got to try to do a good job on, is the running back Fletcher and the receiver Phil Pott, because Phil Pott is capable of having a 200-yard game against your secondary, and Fletcher, he can do it all. He can run in the backfield. He can also catch out of the backfield. So to me, those are 2 key players for the Argos to key on the Montreal offense, in my opinion.
Yeah, I slightly disagree with keying on Fletcher. I think what we saw last week or 2 weeks ago when they played Montreal, the run game really wasn't there. Montreal did not run very much, and the weakness that they were exploiting was that their pass coverage sucked. So I think you let guys like McManus and Sopik and Jones and Kassar, they can deal with Fletcher, but you've got to put more into the secondary to deal with guys like you mentioned, guys like Phil Pott, like Julian Grant, like Speaker, who are going to exploit any weaknesses on the passing side. I would let them run if I was defensive coordinator, because they didn't really establish a whole lot out of it 2 weeks ago, and leave it to where you were weak last time.
But Montreal was on the road the last time, and I think most football teams are better running teams at home. So I think the Argos are going to get a heavy dose of Fletcher too, and it's going to be an interesting. The first quarter is going to be key. If the Argos can stay within 7 points or less and keep themselves in the game, they have a chance. But if they fall behind 14-0, 21-0, if they have the same start that Hamilton had against the BC, it could be a long night. But if Toronto can just hang around in the first quarter and just get to halftime down by less than 10 points, they have a chance. But they can't beat themselves. They're going to have to play their best game of the year to have a chance to upset the Alouettes. And this leads to my next question, Nick. Who is this week's X factor of the game for the Argonauts against the Montreal Alouettes?
Yeah, this might be kind of unfair, but kind of like I mentioned before, it's the receiving core that I really want to see be the X factor this week. If they want any hope at beating Montreal, they need to score points, because it's not like they're playing a rookie in Shea Patterson who threw for some 200 yards and I don't think even reached 100 by halftime last week. Like, they didn't look that great offensively. Cody Fajardo is the best quarterback in the CFL right now. They can't afford to score a couple field goals and hope that the D can hold on. They need to actively pursue and score points, and the wide receiving core needs to be a part of that, which they have not been the last 2 games. So for that reason, I'm going to put the pressure on the receiving core to prove that they're a good group of receivers, at least as equal to Montreal, and put some yardage to prove that this week.
I'm going to go with the special teams again. The entire special teams unit is my X factor, and I think Grant is capable of having another return for a touchdown, either a punt or a kickoff. So I'm going to go with special teams as the X factor in this game.
Even just good field position would make a huge difference if you're starting around the 50 or the 55-yard line, as opposed to back in your own 15 or 20. It would definitely make a huge benefit. And I think you can take advantage of the fact that Montreal's got a new kicker in their system. I'm not entirely sure how it'll impact kickoffs. Punting will still be the same, but I don't really know a whole lot about Maltos. And I heard they signed one of the former kickers from Ottawa as well, but he doesn't appear in the depth chart. So I'm going to assume it's Maltos this week kicking. So if they can take advantage of maybe a slightly weaker leg on kickoffs and get better field position out of it, even if they go 2 and out, again, talking about the case of turnovers versus not, if you throw an interception and Montreal gets to that midfield, you're in a big disadvantage. But if you go 2 and out even, and you punt it and pin Montreal in their own 15 or 20, it makes a longer and tougher field for Fajardo.
I should have done this before, but I'd be curious to see what the weather forecast is going to be for Montreal tomorrow night, if rain's going to be a factor in that game.
Yeah, I think could be a possibility. Usually Montreal's about a day behind us in terms of the weather forecast. And we had decent rain here, but it kind of cleared up in the afternoon and evening here. I don't know if since we went live, if it's rained. In Mississauga, near Toronto is where I live.
It's still raining here. It's still raining here. So
yeah, so it probably will potentially be a factor that there is a little bit of wet weather in Montreal.
How bad is Jake Serenza? He's only on the 1-game list then?
Yes, he's only on the 1 game. So hopefully it's not too serious. It's just kind of a bad shoulder bruise is what I'm hoping, but I haven't exactly seen the full extent.
Any other any other injuries or anybody coming off that list that's going to play this week?
Well, Tommy Neal got added to the list after last week's game, so that's a bit of a disadvantage. Looking at it as well, I think pretty much everybody's the same. Looking at it now, yeah, from what I see, yeah, no changes otherwise. So I think what really hurts is like looking at the amount of players on the 6 game injury list. Toronto and Montreal are fairly similar. I think there's a bigger case to be made that some of the guys on the Argos injured list might have a bigger impact on their roster compared to Montreal's. And again, that's not disparaging on Montreal's players, but when you've lost both Flo Rimolade, Jake Zarezna, you've lost a couple of good wide receivers in David Unger and Tommy Neal and Dejan Brissett. Kevin Mittal hasn't even played a game yet and started on the 6 game injured list. You've lost for sure one starting O lineman in Darius Sirocco and a second potentially in Dylan Giffen. I mean, all of that adds up to almost an entire offense being down. So it's a bit of a significant disadvantage when you've lost some key weapons, and then not to mention, of course, Chad Kelly not playing still, which we'll see what turns up with that over the next couple games.
Yeah, I kind of just want to focus on the guys that are on the team, and hopefully Dukes will come out and play a good game. I do think he has the talent, but people got to realize too, he's a young quarterback. He's still learning, and that would be a good teaching experience for him last week against Saskatchewan, especially with the Argos coaching
Yeah.
staff for
The
Dukes. And go ahead, Nick.
the big question is going to be if things do kind of go south early, if he does throw, let's say, 2 interceptions in the first half, or if there's a fumble and an INT, how long a leash does Cam Dukes have? And I think if things go, if they don't get rolling early, I can very well see Dukes get pulled early for someone like Arbuckle or Scott.
Yeah, I would believe it would be Arbuckle because I think Dinwiddie likes his experience and his calming demeanor. So I think Arbuckle will be ready to step in when he's called upon.
Yeah, and
So
If Arbuckle can't get them going enough to really contend, I think that's when you might see Cam Dukes in to get more experience in that garbage time, kind of like 2 weeks ago against Montreal.
yep. And finally, before we wrap this show up, Nick, CFL week 6 already, which is hard to believe. I'm gonna let you go first. We got Toronto, Montreal tomorrow night, Calgary, Winnipeg Friday night. Saskatchewan and BC is the CFL game of the week to me. This week BC's what 3-1, 4-1.
Yep.
Saskatchewan's 4-0, and then Sunday we have Ottawa, who's struggling right now, and Drew Brown's going to be out. I'm assuming against the winless Edmonton Elks.
Yeah, Brown's still kind of a game time decision right now, but I think a lot of it comes to concussion protocol because we know how willy nilly that can be, because there's so many determining factors on that. But on to the picks. So unfortunately, unlike some of my colleagues, I'm not quite as bullish on Toronto. I I just don't think the factors lie in Toronto's favor enough for them to win over Montreal. So I'm going to pick Montreal at home over Toronto. Um, I'm going to actually take Calgary over Winnipeg. Zach
Really?
Collaros, it sounds
Really?
like he's going to return, but he hasn't been that good and hasn't really been on the same page with his wide receivers. And Winnipeg's defense isn't as good as Montreal's either. And Calgary probably should have won that game if they were able to generate any form of offensive production. So I got to think Jake Mayer and Calgary is going to find something to win this game in Winnipeg. So I'm picking them. Saskatchewan and BC, I'm going to take BC. I really like the way Vernon Adams played against Hamilton, and I think they can keep it rolling. Although the last time he played a Corey Mace defense, he threw 6 interceptions. So we'll see what happens there. And then, as I've mentioned before, Edmonton is winning this game, or all hell is breaking loose in Edmonton, and everybody's being fired left, right, and center. So, Edmonton over Ottawa.
Okay, Nick, my picks. I do agree with you on the opening game. I hate to say this. This pains to say me. It pains me to say this, but I got to go with the defending Grey Cup champion Alouettes, 27-17 over the Argonauts. I think the Argonauts can keep it within 10 points. The next game, I got to go with Winnipeg over Calgary, 24-16. I'm just not sold on the Stampeders. I don't think they're a playoff team. BC and Saskatchewan. Gotta go with BC at home, 31-21 over Saskatchewan. And then the Sunday night game, this is going to be a nail biter. The Elks will get a late second field goal to win 23-20 over Ottawa and finally get that first win of the year.
Yeah, I have Edmonton a little handlier on the CFL pick'ems. I've got them by 10.
10. Which game are besides the Argo Montreal game? Which one are you looking forward to the most?
I think I'm looking forward to Saskatchewan at BC because I think this is going to be Saskatchewan's real test again against a top tier team. I mean, Toronto, unfortunately, in my opinion, should have won that game, and they just made far too many mistakes that cost them. But the other game Saskatchewan's won has been Hamilton twice, and their first game I think was Ottawa, if I'm not mistaken, or no, it was Edmonton. But yeah, I like they're playing teams that still have not won a game, and then the Toronto game, like I said, in my opinion, it was more Toronto losing the game than it was Saskatchewan winning. So that for that reason, that's why I think it's going to be the most intriguing matchup this week. And I hope I'm wrong and I get mocked by all my colleagues in Torontoville because as much as it pains me and I don't want to see our team go with on a 3-game losing streak going into the Hammer off a bye the week after. I think I just don't know if they have what it takes to beat Montreal because while the game against Calgary showed them some weaknesses, they still won the game ultimately and they keep rolling and clicking. So yeah, I think just the way Toronto's built right now with their injuries and whatnot, I just don't think they're going to be able to overcome what Montreal brings.
The Alouettes have just had a new owner, a year and a half ago, and look at the turnaround there. The franchise is back to being a Grey Cup champion and being competitive. The fans are coming back to Montreal. I think 23,000 their last game. So it's good to see them successful in Montreal. Unfortunately, tomorrow night we need the Argos to be successful, but I do think the Argos can be competitive in this game if they can play a clean football game, and anything can happen. And the Argos, one thing we didn't bring up, Nick, before we end this show,
Yep.
I don't think the defense has got that many takeaways so far this year after
Oh
4
no.
games.
Yeah, not nearly like it was in past years, and I've kind of addressed this in the last couple of weeks that's something that's unfortunately been a bit lacking this season. I think, and give credit to Patterson, that was probably the one thing above all that he couldn't afford to do, which he didn't do, was turn the ball over. Unlike Cam Dukes, if if he turned the ball over 2 or 3 times, it would have been a very different story. I think for last week's game. So for any I think we're gonna need those timely interceptions that we saw at BMO Field so many times last season. It's just not there quite yet, and I think that's part of the secondary not being quite where they should be sometimes. But like I said, it could always be worse, and we'll leave it on the happy note that we're not in the situation of our friend Owen 5 down in the Hammer.
Absolutely. And speaking of that, the Argos are in the Hammer in Hamilton on Saturday, July 20th at 7 o'clock. And you can get tickets at tigercats.ca. And that'll be a huge game, too, because Hamilton would love to win their first game of the year against their hated QEW rivals of the Toronto Argonauts. But as Pete Costanza says, the Argos receivers coach, one game at a time, and their focus is against Montreal. And there's no gimme games in this league. So I'm hoping we'll both hope Nick the Argos will come out tomorrow night and play a mistake-free football and make it a very competitive game. But Nick, before we wrap up our 5th episode of this season, which is hard to believe, where can our audience follow you on social media and your Twitter page?
As always, you can see it on the link below if you're watching it on video. It's Nick_small_38 on Twitter.
All right. And if you want to go to an Argos game this year at BMO Field, you can get tickets at argonauts.ca/tickets. And Nick, before we wrap the show up, did you get an email from Ticketmaster yesterday about
Nope. I was one of
no?
the lucky ones that didn't get snake bitten by their data breach. If you haven't already heard, there was a data breach that I can't remember the exact numbers, but it's somewhere in the hundreds of thousands of credit card details and personal info that got released. So if you haven't already, change your password, set up two-factor authentication, all that kind of fun stuff, and protect yourself. I think Ticketmaster is also providing free like encryption or like added credit security measures for free for anybody who's been affected. So if you've got that offer, take advantage of it and protect yourself from fraudsters.
All right, Nick, that's about it. I want to say thanks for coming on to episode 5 tonight here on this Wednesday, July 10th, 2024. And looking forward to the Argos Alouettes game tomorrow night, 7:30 on TSN and on the radio TSN 1050 with Mike Hogan and Ben Grant. That's it for this week, Nick. I guess we'll see you back next week for episode 6 of the Argo Bounce live audio show with Nick Small and myself. I want to say thank you to everyone watching this live streamed on Facebook, LinkedIn, YouTube, Twitch, Twitter, X, and on Instagram and on all major audio platforms. And the Argo Bounce live audio show is on weekly on WQEE 99.1 FM. I hope everybody has a great evening here in rainy Southern Ontario, and looking forward to the next 4 nights of CFL football.
Take care, everybody. Go Argos.
Thanks, Nick. Go Argos, and everybody. The next live with CDP Sports Talk, Friday night, 7 o'clock, was my guest, Lissa Crawford. She's a board member with the U.S. Veterans Hall of Fame, and we're going to talk about her role with them. And then Monday, July 15th, 7 o'clock, Pat Bernard from the Edge of Philly Sports reporter is going to come on and talk Philadelphia Phillies and Philadelphia Eagles with us as well. So again, thanks to Nick Small for coming on, and I want to say thank you to everyone for watching and listening to the Argo Bounce live audio show, a weekly show devoted to the 18-time CFL Grey Cup champion Toronto Argonauts. I hope everybody has a great evening, and we'll see you back here next week for episode 6 of the Argo Bounce live audio show with Nick Small and Chris Pomay. Have a good night, everybody, and as always, go Argos.
Go, Toronto Argos, go, go, go. Pull together, fight the foe, foe, foe. Scoring touchdowns for the blue on blue. The Argos will win for you. Full of fight and courage, you can't stop. They pile up the points until they reach the top. Pull together till the Grey Cups won. Go Argos, go, go, go. Together fight the foe, foe, foe. Scoring touchdowns for the blue on blue. The Argos will win for you. Full of fight and courage, you can't stop. They pile up the points until they reach the top. Pull